Hi, good day everyone. With me again, Lady Trialdi. In Introductory Macroeconomics class, I have explained about the long-run determinants of unemployment and inflation. Since in the long run, unemployment rate is equal to the natural rate of unemployment, factors that affect the frictional and structural unemployment would affect the unemployment rate in the long run. By contrast, we know also that inflation depends primarily on growth in the money supply, which a monetary authority solely controls. Therefore, in the long run, inflation and unemployment are unrelated problems. But how about in the short run? Well, this is what we are going to examine more closely. How the trade-off may hold in the short run, how the condition adjusts in the long run, and what issues the trade-off raises for policymakers. For these reasons, we will evaluate the so-called Phillips curve. The origins of the Phillips curve come from an article by A.W. Phillips. Phillips showed that years with low unemployment tend to have high inflation, and years with high unemployment tend to have low inflation. Here is the short-run Phillips curve showing the negative correlation between inflation rate and unemployment rate. It occurs because in the short run, aggregate demand affects both price and output level, as well as inflation and unemployment. Look, this is the diagram showing the aggregate demand and the aggregate supply curves in the short run. At equilibrium point A, the level of output and the level of price are Y0 and P0 respectively. At these output and price levels, the inflation and unemployment rates are P0 and U0 respectively, or point A in the short-run Phillips curve, or SRPC. When aggregate demand is higher at AD1, the higher levels of price and output at equilibrium point B imply the higher inflation and the lower unemployment at point B in the SRPC. By contrast, when aggregate demand is lower at AD2, the opposite occurs. Inflation now is lower, while unemployment is higher. The condition can be interpreted as well that movement along the short-run Phillips curve occurs due to the shift of the aggregate demand curve. Therefore, change in one of the aggregate demand elements here shifts the eddy curve to the right or to the left and causes point movement along the SRPC upward or downward. After knowing the factors that make inflation and unemployment move in opposite direction, is it possible that inflation and unemployment move in the same direction instead? The answer is yes. It may happen if the SRPC shifts to the right or to the left, as shown in the diagram here. When the SRPC shifts, the economy may move from point A to point B or to point C, so that both inflation and unemployment increase together or decrease together. They move in the same direction. Now the question is, how does the SRPC shift? Let's take a look again this ADSRAS diagram. This is what happens when the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts, maybe because of the supply shocks or the change in price expectation. When aggregate supply is lower at SRAS1, we can observe that output decreases at point B, resulting in higher unemployment rate, while price increases at the same point, resulting in higher inflation rate. The high inflation and unemployment rates are reflected by point B in the SRPC1. By contrast, when aggregate supply is higher at SRAS2, both inflation and unemployment are now lower at point C in the SRPC2. So, the conclusion is, while change in AD causes movement along the SRPC, change in SRAS causes shift of the SRPC. Worth noting as well that SRAS and SRPC shift in different direction. When SRAS shifts to the right, SRPC shifts to the left. On the other hand, when SRAS shifts to the left, SRPC shifts to the right. Now, how about the long-run condition? In the long run, inflation and unemployment are largely unrelated. The consequence is the long-run Phillips curve is a vertical line like the LRS curve. Unemployment rate is at its natural rate without any influence from inflation. To make it clear, suppose that we have this initial condition. When there is this inflationary monetary policy, eddy curve shifts to the left from AD0 to AD1. and both price and output levels decline at equilibrium point B. Shift in eddy curve then causes movement along the SRPC from point A to point B along the SRPC 0. Inflation rate is lower at P1 while unemployment is higher at U1. With lower price, however, expected price will adjust in the long run, shifting the SRAS curve to the right from SRAS 0 to SRAS 1. It further decreases the price level, but returns the output level to its long run or natural level at Y0 or Y bar. The final equilibrium in the long run is at point C. And return to SRPC, the shift in SRAS causes RRPC to shift from SRPC 0 to SRPC 1. With the same level of inflation, at point C, the unemployment rate returns to its natural rate at U bar or U0. The conclusion is monetary policy or change in AD may affect inflation in the long run, but may not change the unemployment rate. It only moves the equilibrium point from point A to point C on the vertical LRPC. Let's continue now evaluating the long-run impact of the supply shock or higher price expectation. In the short run, both cases shift the SRAS curve to the left, reaching new equilibrium at point B with higher price and lower output level. When SRAS curve shifts to the left, the consequence is the SRPC shift to the right, reaching point B as well as SRPC1 with higher inflation and higher unemployment rates. But again, in the long run, price expectation rises following the rise in price. Then after the stagflation and the wage spiral effect, the price expectation continues to decline and shift the SRAS back to SRAS 0. Returning price and output to their initial levels at point A. As SRAS shift back to SRAS 0, SRPC also shifts back from SRPC 1 to SRPC 0, returning inflation to P0 and unemployment to its natural level at U bar or U0. So, supply shock or change in price expectation leaves the vertical LRAS curve and LRPC unchanged at the same natural rate of output and unemployment respectively. Lastly, from all the explanation about the Phillips curve, we can draw several policy implications. First of all, as suggested by Friedman and Phelps, it is dangerous to view the Phillips curve as a menu of options available to policymakers, particularly if the government intends to reduce unemployment using expansionary policies as shown in the diagram here. With long-run characteristic of Phillips curve, the temporary trade-off between unemployment and inflation disappears in the long run. In the long run, the monetary policy will just permanently increase the inflation rate, while the unemployment rate will rise again as people adjust their expectation of inflation and accordingly shift the SRPC to the right. The movement at the end is from A to C rather than from A to B. In other case, this inflationary monetary policy can also be pursued despite of the temporary trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Recall this diagram. The disinflationary policy moves point A to point B in the short run, reducing inflation from P0 to P1, but rising unemployment rate from U0 to U1. The cost of reducing inflation, that is, this rise in unemployment rate, is summarized in a statistic called sacrifice ratio. The ratio depends on the slope of SRPC and on how quickly expectation of inflation adjusts to the disinflationary monetary policy. Look, if the SRPC is more elastic at SRPC1, the sacrifice ratio and the cost of disinflation is bigger as shown by the higher increase in unemployment rate from U0 to U2 instead. But the sacrifice may be smaller or even disappear if the economy reaches point C or if the SRPC shift from SRPC 0 to SRPC 2 pretty fast. Is it possible to have quick adjustment on expectation of inflation? Such prominent economists as Lucas, Sargent, and Barrow with their rational expectation view think it could happen if people are rational. When the government and the monetary authority made a credible commitment to a policy or low inflation, rational people adjust their expectation quickly. Therefore, after the policy moved from point A to B along the SRPC 0, the SRPC also shifted to the left immediately and leave the economy with almost no temporary trade-off between inflation reduction and unemployment, or the sacrifice ratio is close to 0. Okay, that's all from me. Hopefully it's clear now that Phillips curve theory not only raises the trade-off issues between inflation and unemployment, but also raises awareness of the policymakers before implementing certain macroeconomic policy. Thank you for your attention. See you again in other videos with different basic macroeconomics topics.